Hmm. Good morning. I don't think that you can see that screen. Okay. Well, excuse the hat, but my hair's a mess today. Um, this is kind of combining all my classes for this lesson today. We're in the United States History and Geography book. Contemporary studies students, this is where you would be, or are. Um, Chapter 26, Vietnam, 1954 to 1975. So the Vietnam conflict lasted 21 years, according to my calculation there. We lost something like 50 some thousand in the military action in Vietnam during that period. I mean, soldiers killed. Um, Many more died as a result of having been in Vietnam. Uh, this is Vietnam. It's Southeast Asia. Um, North Vietnam is in the yellow or gold, and South Vietnam's in the green. And we were on the side of South Vietnam. We were trying to keep communism from spreading. It was a result of the Cold War, is what caused the Vietnam War. I intended for you to be able to see the screen. I've pulled up the smartboard notebook file, but that's not gonna work. Our vocabulary words were media. Now everybody here knows what media is, right? Now we're jumping over to page 714 in your book. Media. I was the media when I worked for the newspaper. So the media is newspapers, not so much nowadays, but newspapers, television, internet, anything that communicates mass communication. Now, if you think this is something you've already had, don't worry about it. You still need to know it. So we're going to go through it again. Media. Let's see what the book says media is. The book says a means of expression or communication, especially in reference to the agencies of mass communication, newspapers, radio, television, and the internet. That's what media is. The second word is disproportionate. Does anyone here know what disproportionate is? It means out of balance to me. Let's see what they say. Disproportionate number of working class and minority youths went to war. That would be my brother. We were kind of poor, and he was gotten a little bit of a hometown jam, so to speak, kind of like Bruce Springsteen's song about Born in the USA. And he was 17 and made to go join the army. He wasn't drafted. And then he was in Thailand, and then all of a sudden he was in Vietnam. I guess when he turned 18. Um, he wasn't a combat person, but I don't know what he saw in Vietnam, but it changed his life, and not for the better. And so disproportionate, being out of proportion, lacking in proper relation. All right, so we know what disproportionate is. Out of balance, basically. The next word is credibility gap. I remember a credibility gap from being alive during Vietnam, and it was like the gap between what was told to you and what you really believed. In other words, if you don't believe what the president's telling you, then there's a credibility gap. Now let's see what they called it. Yeah, it's a lack of trust or believability. So, what would happen during Vietnam is they would say how many people were going to get killed and versus how many actually did, and then that's one credibility gap. But probably a bigger one would be what we would need to do. If we increased the troop level, we could win the war, and people didn't believe that. And whether they were right or wrong, we didn't win that war. So there's a credibility gap. Teach in. I don't know why I have that up there, and I hope that it's actually one of the words. Let's see what I got. Yeah, it is one of the words. Teach in. I don't remember that. So at the university in March of 1965, a group of faculty members and students at the University of Michigan joined together in a teach-in. They discussed the issues surrounding the war and reaffirmed their reasons for opposing it. I don't know that warrants being included in your history book, but they say an extended meeting or class held to discuss a social or political issue. So we kind of have a teach-in about the virus right now. Every day we learn about it and we share information. The virus is kind of like the Vietnam War, except, well, I guess that's something that you need to think about and share with me if you can. In what ways is the coronavirus going to change the world? To me, it's going to change it in, well, obviously in horrible ways because of people dying, but it also is going to change the world, I think, I hope, in terms of the way people view one another, because it's a kind of a common adversary. Every nation in the world faces the same adversary in the virus, and when it's all said and done, maybe we'll be a little less apt to war with one another, I hope. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that would be cool. Another outcome of the coronavirus I see is the, because people are social distancing and staying in their own environment a little bit more and with their own people, is that the bonding that's occurring right now between in families is kind of unprecedented, I think, and who knows what the impact of that's going to be long term. I mean, I have a grandson who is less than 2 years old, and he's home with his whole family all day long, along with his sister, who is in first grade, and or she's first grade, and it's just there's going to be an impact that maybe is positive in regards to families bonding together, or it could go the other way. It could be that it's negative because, but I think it's got to be positive that the families are huddled together, so to speak. And I think that the bonding and the closeness will be different than in past generations, and it's going to mark this generation. Um, um, and that's kind of amazing. Um, what was the next word? The next word, I have dough down. Let's see what that is. Oh, I think it's supposed to be dove. Uh, why would I have dough? Yeah, that's got to be dove. Let me change it. Changed on my end. Now, I'm not. Uh-oh. I am not going to type the answers on the board because I don't believe that it's showing up on your screen, so that would be a waste of time. So, dove is a person, you guessed it. Yeah, that's right. A person who, in the case of Vietnam, is a person who wanted to get out of Vietnam and stop the war. So, a dove now is a person who is against war, a pacifist. A, a person like myself who would think that, generally speaking, war is futile and barbaric and something that someday society has to stop doing if we want to truly survive. Um, the next word is hawk. If a person is a hawk, that means they like the war. And who knows why someone would like war? It could be that they don't want communism to spread, and they realize that in their mind that that would be the best way to keep communism from spreading and destroying our life. Another reason that someone might would be a hawk would be uh, um, that they're a part of the industrial military complex where they're making a lot of money off of war. Unfortunately, that has happened in the past. And then there are other people who it's just simply a matter of patriotism. They don't necessarily question war, but they realize that they or feel that it's just something that's inevitable and necessary. And who am I to tell something? So a hawk is someone who believed the United States should continue the military efforts in Vietnam. So in the Vietnam era, what was unique about that is, as a child, I saw it on TV every night, is that people would be out in the streets fighting about whether or not we should be in Vietnam, or having marches and or burning, having clashes with policemen or getting shot and killed at Kent State. Um, there, 4 college students were killed by National Guardsmen because they were protesting the Vietnam War, which that's kind of insane to me, but that happened. Um, all right, I think that's enough. Well, I guess we really need to push on and do the second section, um, or maybe not. I don't want to read about the anti-war movement too much because um, that's kind of self-evident. 1968 was a pivotal year in terms of Vietnam. It was the most turbulent year of the chaotic 1960s. Of the chaotic 1960s was 1968. The year saw a shocking political announcement, 2 traumatic assassinations, and a political convention held amid strident anti-war demonstrations. Okay, so 68. Who do you think the uh, 2 assassinations would have been? Um, I'm thinking Martin Luther King and maybe Robert Kennedy. I'm not sure. Let's see if it'll tell us. Robert Kennedy was the Robert Kennedy was the brother of John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, on November 22nd, 1963, I believe. Yeah, more shocking events followed Johnson's announcement. On April 4th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis by James Earl Ray. On June 5th, Robert Kennedy, who appeared likely to win the Democratic nomination, was gunned down by Sirhan, an Arab nationalist. So the Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were both assassinated that year. And Johnson, who had assumed the presidency after Kennedy was assassinated, decided he wasn't going to run for re-election, and the reason was that he wasn't going to get elected because he was very unpopular because he escalated the Vietnam War and people were very much opposed to that. And then, lo and behold, Richard Nixon wins the presidency. At a much more sedate convention, the Republicans selected former Vice President and 1960 presidential hopeful Richard Nixon as their candidate. George Wallace was also ran, but I remember Wallace got shot. I don't know if he got shot at this time exactly, but he Nixon ran against a guy named Hubert Humphrey. Nixon was the one who coined the idea of a silent majority of Americans who sought to maintain law and order but had been overshadowed in recent years by social and political turmoil. So he was very conservative in that regard. He promised that he had a secret plan to bring peace with honor in Vietnam, which that turned out not to happen. We ended up just flat out losing and withdrawing. Humphrey's campaign, he had an anti-war stance, and a week before the election, Johnson announced that bombing of North Vietnam had halted and a ceasefire would follow. These boosts came too late for Humphrey. So, in other words, people were distraught about the Democratic Party because they were the ones that had escalated the war in Vietnam. And at the same time, Humphrey was running on the promise of getting out of Vietnam or ending the war, and Nixon was saying he's going to end the war with honor. So the way it all ends up is that Nixon's going to win, and but he's going to pretty much follow the path of Johnson in continuing escalations of the war and not knowing how to get out of Vietnam. It was a mess. The one thing I glossed over and probably should read before we finish today is the Tet Offensive. On January 30th, 1968, during Tet, the Vietnamese New Year, so that was just during the Vietnamese New Year, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese launched a massive surprise attack in what was called the Tet Offensive. Guerrilla fighters attacked most American air bases in South Vietnam and most of the South's major cities. Viet Cong even blasted their way into the American embassy in Saigon. After about a month of fighting, U.S. and South Vietnamese soldiers repelled the enemy troops, inflicting heavy losses on them. But less tangible damage had been done. Uh, the American people were shocked that an enemy supposedly on the verge of defeat could launch such a large-scale attack. The media openly criticized the war. The American people should be getting ready to accept it, if they haven't already, the prospect that the whole Vietnam effort may be doomed, declared the Wall Street Journal. And they were right. Television newscaster Walter Cronkite said it seemed more certain than ever that the bloody experience in Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. Yeah, it didn't exactly end in a stalemate. We lost. Okay, that's all I'm going to do with you for today. Thanks for listening.